you'd asked me when I was about 9 or 10 what I was going to be when I grew up, I would have said a photographer. At the time, my dad had a dark room downstairs, and he was still shooting film, and he'd been doing a lot of photography during the Korean War, the Air Force. He had a dark room, and it was fun to go down there and watch all the magic chemistry happen. And well, I think being around all the art, particularly his paintings, and seeing how he worked with composition, that was kind of the beginning for me into photography. And then spending my life working with people as a hairstylist in my hair salon, and working with people and personalities and expressions of personality and expressions of personal style, that has kind of crept into my photography and my work. And now I kind of, what really inspires me is finding evidence of personality or identity in a scene and creating an image that makes me stop, and hopefully the viewers stop and ponder what exactly is this, and then project their own things into it. I've always been fascinated with perception, even when I was not doing photography in my hair salon career, because that's basically what we create is a perception. My first job was in 1977, that's when I graduated, and went straight into a salon. I went into the biggest, poshest salon in Atlanta at Phipps Plaza. It's called Donald's. The clients were old Atlanta, old wealthy Atlanta. They all had chauffeurs and limousines that lived on West Paces, and I'd just never seen that world before. The hardest thing for me was I was extremely introverted. And some part of me recognized at the very beginning that would be a vehicle out of that for me. But within 30 days, it just fit. Had all the creativity, it had the people, it had the personalities, it had the artistic, and it was something that I desperately wanted to do, which was break out of my introversion. And in 92, I opened my own salon, and from 92 until COVID in March, I've had my own salon. I had different iterations of that. The largest was I had 16 hairdressers at the Prado, and the most recent version of that was just myself with no employees working in my own salon in Buckhead in Atlanta.
For my part, I became seriously interested in pursuing a career in art early on in high school. I had some good art teachers in the Chicago school system, and I remember one of them saying that you could become an illustrator, and gave me some books, and I planted the idea in my head. Well, maybe I could do this. I'd sure like to, and I did. And I went to the American Academy in Chicago. It was a traditional academic type of art education. I wanted to feel that I was responsible, being able to be responsible. So I went into illustration, but at that time, which was, oh my God, I was in art school in 1948, so at that time, illustration was still a big part of American society. To be a well-known illustrator was something to aspire to. I was very ambitious, but soon after I got out of art school and began to work for a few years, it was fine. I found though that most of my work involved advertising rather than illustration for story illustration or book illustration. Those markets were disappearing, and in a few years it just about completely disappeared with the advent of television and the decline of magazines. What was left was advertising illustration, which was challenging. It's hard It took a lot of skill and a lot of discipline, but it involved doing work for other people and solving their needs rather than your own. Consequently, you never particularly wanted to sign anything you did or take complete responsibility to it, because other people, teams of people, had input into it and influenced what you did. It was never felt that it was entirely your own work. So early on, I, as an outlet, I turned to the fine arts more as a way of expression, knowing that there's probably not a whole lot of financial reward in it. I find it tremendously satisfying just doing my own work for my own reasons and seeing what financial reward comes from it. Just let that play out on its own terms.
Well, what I noticed as I was a child growing up is, as far as that balance between you and art and providing and making a living, was that you really didn't get to do much of the fine art, but you had to do a lot of the commercial stuff just to provide. And so there was always a compromise going on. And I saw growing up all the sacrifices that you made to the art for the family. He's painted and sold over 5,000 paintings. I mean, he's very, very prolific, and that's something that's innate in him and just has to happen. He still paints today, every day. That's his way of fixing that balance between having to do the commercial and then also being artistic, creative, expressive. And my mother was the same way. She didn't want to do anything that was commercial. She wanted to only do the expressive art.
She devoted her time to homemaking and never actually worked much, although she did some commercial work. She trained to do commercial work, I think, at the University of Georgia. But early on, she found ceramics. It was more of a designer craftsman, I guess is a better description of what she did. It involved working with the basic materials that have been used since prehistory, just clay, native Georgia clay, and went through a process of kneading it, getting the air bubbles out. It was a long process. And hand-built ceramics, you roll it into a thin sheet and then manipulate it, and either with coil, build up a container with coils or shape, and shape it with your hands, or on a wheel, work on a wheel, which he had several wheels, electric and hand and foot powered. Throw a lump of clay, which takes a good bit of skill, into and as you're throwing the pot up and it rises up into a hollow form, you can manipulate it and shape it in ways which you can see in the exhibit. She also did some functional everyday wear, but her art was really in the experimental, more sculptural pieces, which I liked. There was a piece she did after reading E.B. White's
Charlotte's Web.
Charlotte's Web, yeah. Very whimsical version, a sort of homage to E.B. White's book and the story. And I always loved that piece. She became really one of the top designer craftsmen in the area.
She had a show at the High Museum. They purchased several of her pieces. They're in their permanent collection, which she was juried into and then won an award and then got the Purchase Award. She had 5 kilns at the house. She built a gas kiln that was big enough that I could crawl in it at 12 or 13. And we had a gas line brought down from the street, a 2-inch. You couldn't do this today, but it was a 2-inch gas line that came down from the street, which was 200, 300 feet up, to the kiln, and she would be out there all night monitoring that and watching the cones melt. And she had all these, she'd mix her own clays. She'd buy, I don't know where she bought it, but she'd buy this and that, and she'd mix this kind with that kind, and for some reason. And she also, when she went to Georgia State and got her degree down there in glaze chemistry, she made her own glazes from chemical beginnings. And there were, 40 or 50 little jars, mayonnaise jars, with all these little different ores and chemicals and drums of stuff, and and a lot of it. This was the 60s and 70s, and a lot of it was carcinogenic.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact, and she used to, she would formulate all these glazes, and she had these really accurate triple beam scale down there. And she would either give us allowance money or let us, I don't remember which it was, but we would mix, she'd write out the number of grams of all these different things, and we would measure it out in the grams and pour it in and put all the different components in there. And I know for a fact that I was playing with lead, I was playing with arsenic, I was playing with, all these things that nobody knew was a no-no at the time.
She always amazed me because she was extremely creative, I think more creative than I certainly was in a lot of ways. She always had terrific ideas for the next piece, and I think you can see that in the selection of works on exhibit. She was never at a loss for what to do next, and I admire that greatly.
She was mom, so I didn't really see her as an artist. Now that I'm older and more matured in the art area and what I'm doing, I appreciate what she did much more, and the creativity and the uniqueness of it. Being an artist, for me, is, I feel like there's a lot of self-doubt about whether you really are or can be. I went through a lot of that when I was working with my profession, which was hair. I mean, it's, I joke when I attend a photography critique, and the critiquer talks about my work and critiques me, that's not anywhere near as terrifying as having a woman jump up and scream and burst into tears because you've ruined her hair. So I can handle the critiques okay, but the actual getting to the point where I believe that it's good is that's the part that I have to work on. And who knows, maybe there again, we're back to perception, what you think and what I think and what somebody else thinks, and it's all perception. So you just have to do what you love. All the things that I've liked that seem to get appreciation from other people are things that I've really liked, that I've enjoyed making, and a lot of them were given to me, in all honesty. They just happened, like the little boy with the flag. I was at the dirt track, the Tri-County dirt track race up in North Georgia, shooting that. I went there for 5 or 6 or 7 events over the course of maybe 3 or 4 years, like 4th of July and Memorial Day, and shot each time. And that's the best shot from all of that series. And it just happened. I was standing there, and the kids were standing over there, and I didn't even look through the viewfinder. And it just worked. And what I liked about it, getting back to the perception and reality, is you don't really quite know what that image is about. And I had it showing in the store window at my studio, and one of my co-tenants was furious and called the landlord and wanted to have him tell me to take it down. And to me, I was just like, wow. And I think what that person saw in that image was the flag over the face was a representation of blind leading, or, you know, which is not what it was. It was a little kid looking at a group of them at a race, at a dirt track race, looking through the flag at the sun, is what was actually happening. So I just love images that make you wonder what's going on, but then you don't know what's going on, but there's 15,000 different ways it could be interpreted. It's going to sound really weird, but I know when I'm being told to do something. I just know that I can't tell you how many times I've turned around on the road and gone back to something. And sure enough, something happens there that I had no knowledge of. This ended up being a really good image or a good experience, or I meet someone. Do you feel like that?
Oh,
too?
yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, I've noticed that with you a lot.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like it's almost a spiritual.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
You know, I wouldn't want to say what it is. You could consider it a higher power, or your faith, or a hunch, or maybe even more mundane, just an appreciation for the quality of the light over in that area or time of day or something. That guides me through not just the photography, but it guides me through life. And well, I grew up I was a teenager in the late 60s, early 70s. And so that was the Vietnam era and the drugs and all of that. And God bless my parents, I went down that road full force, did the hippie thing and the marijuana thing and the drug thing and the rebellion thing and all the self-centered stuff. In 1981, I finally had enough and got sober. And at that point, my life completely changed, and I gave up all of that, or it was taken from me. Let's get back to where it was I was relieved from it. And since that point, for me, that guidance is that spiritual discipline and process of the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and which I still attend today. This coming February 22nd will be 40 years. That is not a part of my life, it is my life. That spiritual listening. Sometimes I don't want to listen, that's another story, but it's always where I go. It's always where I end up.
And as far as Todd, it's been a revelation to watch him find things around him that I would bypass and without a second glance, and come up with a terrific image that most people would never see. And it's terrifically thought-provoking images that he comes up with and just discovers on his own. And that, of course, that's what art's about, and that's what an artist is supposed to do.